All right. Greetings. It's a real honor for me to welcome Professor Jim Wescoat, Aga Khan Professor Emeritus at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, to share some thoughts regarding his work in the Ravi watershed. Professor Westcoat is one of the most distinguished architects and planners who has worked in Pakistan and in various parts of the country, and he continues to serve on the boards of two major universities in the country, the Lahore University of Management Sciences and the Aga Khan University. So very honored that he has prepared this presentation as an opening for our conference. So over to you, Professor Westcoat.
Okay, well, thank you, Salim, and greetings, colleagues. I very much appreciate this opportunity to share some reflections for the BNU Policy Dialogue on rethinking urbanization along the Ravi. I just wish I was there with you in Lahore. You'll recognize these opening images of the Ravi River floodplain near Kamran's Baradari, which we studied with the UET Lahore and the Department of Archaeology in the late 1980s. This was a time of the Great Flood of 1988, when the Shalimar bunds were breached. Residents told us that they had lost their homes and barely escaped up the railway embankment. Ravi boatmen told us that they rowed out to rescue people based on their faith in Allah and their recollections of the Khwaja Khizr, the patron saint of river crossings. Low-income communities shared their water concerns and aspirations then as they do today. And it seems to me that perhaps an important part of rethinking involves asking how these complex situations have developed over time. One also wants to know more about the river's heritage and to consider how this fascinating history and heritage can help rethink urbanization along the Ravi. Rather than start with problems, let's begin with some inspiration from Sultanate Lahore, time when Daja Ganj Baksh was writing his Kashaf al-Mujub on the old Ravi River terrace, shown in green on the left. Lahore owed its location to this elevated area at the junction of a major road and river crossing. And perhaps the most inspired writing about the Ravi in that period comes from the poet Masood Salman, who wrote, "Oh Ravi, if paradise is to be found, it is you." An ideal toward which one might recollect and aspire to re-envision today. 5 centuries later, a new urban model developed, pioneered at Agra, and it began when Babur Humayun and his brother Kamran built riverfront gardens, initially in opposition to the citadels in those locations. The gardens were not entirely idyllic given the political dynamics of the time, but they shaped the longer heritage of Mughal cities, including Lahore. Fortified cities, citadels followed, first at Agra, then Lahore, and one of Akbar's first references to the Ravi depicts the citadel, but also involves a tumultuous river crossing when several people drowned. What these early Mughal rulers did not know was that the river channel at Agra was unusually stable compared to those at Lahore and Delhi. The latter meandered and eventually migrated almost a kilometer away from their respective citadels. So if we look from this angle, the Agra riverfront looks quite stable and idyllic. But from the river edge, we see that the garden walls and gorges have eroded and flooded in events that have been recorded from Mughal and modern sources as recently as just last year. Back in Shah Jahan's Lahore, garden building continued along the old river terrace, indicated in the light dashed line marking the Ravi River floodplain. Shalimar Bagh took advantage of this elevated terraced location as did the nearby shrines of Madulal Hussein and the Bagbanpura settlement. However, modern urban development extended north into less well-drained floodplain conditions from Shalimar Bagh to the Bund Road and beyond. In fact, our survey shown here of some 300 pre-colonial sites in Lahore, of those sites, only Kamran's Baradari lies within the floodplain. And that was a product as much of human as natural causes when Aurangzeb built a massive bund in response to flooding in 1662. One historian wrote, "In many places, the embankment was decorated with very pleasing and pleasant buildings. The foundation of the embankment rested on top of wells sunk in close proximity, like big water wells, masonry wells. The Bund was compared to Alexander's dam against the forces of disorder, Gog and Magog, shown on the right hand painting. But it also contributed to the damaging river channel migration westward toward Shadra as an unintended consequence. Where is this monumental Alambiri Bund today? It's unknown. It's gone. A couple of centuries later, colonial transformations produced what Professor Danish Mustafa has called an urban hydrohazardscape. He was writing about the Leh Nala in Rawalpindi, but it applies as well to Lahore. Irrigation canals depleted the river, and wastewater drains concentrated pollutants. Flooding led to experiments with river training with limited success. There were several parks and forest preserves that were designated in the floodplain, remnants of which survive. And interestingly, drainage was arguably the central challenge of the metropolitan area, then as now, in order to secure safe drinking water, sanitation, flood mitigation, and to guide urban design. These things came together, or these considerations came together in a proposed land use plan in 1944 that designated the Ravi River floodplain as an area of prohibited development, intended to provide and complete the corridor of an agro-urban buffer that was to surround the metropolitan area. This was eclipsed by independence and large-scale human migration, and 8 years of negotiation by the Indus Waters Treaty of 1960 resulted, among other things, in the Ravi flows being depleted as the river was allocated to India, and this depletion continues. Despite that, large-scale precipitation events have increased in frequency and magnitude. So storm events and storm-related flooding continue to present issues in the region. The same period, this mid-20th century period, is when the field of floodplain management began worldwide. And it was based in large measure on the work of a geographer, Gilbert White, my mentor as a student, who showed in the 1940s that the more the US government spent on flood control projects, the greater the economic losses. Question, how is this possible? The more effort you put in, the greater the losses. And the answer that they found was called the levee effect, or we could call it the Bund effect, the embankment effect, where new flood protection works lead to intensified urbanization and development, reduced risk perception in what were only partially protected areas of the floodplain. Now, Gilbert suggested 3 ways in which urban floodplain management research can help enhance human and environmental well-being that might be relevant for the policy dialogue. The first was to conduct ex post evaluations of what actually happens when development occurs in the floodplain. Not what's planned and what's anticipated, but what actually happens. Secondly, to plan for unanticipated risks and hazards. And third, to try to expand the range of choice amongst planning, design, and policy alternatives that deserve consideration. Take a brief look at each of these three. Among the ex post evaluations that might be useful for the Ravi, this could include assessment of urban nala restoration projects on smaller scale. The one on the left has a 100-year history of ups and downs in the Boston area and many failures as well as successes to be studied. One on the right is just starting in the Nizamuddin area of Delhi. Ex post evaluation could include studies of more recent urban design interventions like the sponge cities of China. On the left, room for the river projects in the Netherlands and Singapore on the right. It's interesting that Sabarmati River in Ahmedabad is sometimes held up as an urban design precedent, but the Sabarmati remains one of the most polluted rivers in India, as direct wastewater discharge has continued even after real estate development was completed. Well, secondly, what types of unanticipated hazards does urbanization bring, and what resources might help address them? Some examples here of studies I've found interesting. And from our historical survey, we learned that the Ravi presents an unusual case. It's a depleted monsoon river. So it still has the seasonality of the monsoon, and it has increasing, however, pluvial storm events. And those are going to create the new types of flood hazards within the monsoon environment, coupled with problems of the longer low flow season, in which any water bodies and floodplain conditions may start to face issues of stagnation, eutrophication, vector hazards to be designed for, and also in every season, some of the questions of political, economic, and governance uncertainties. How can one plan and design for these types of uncertainties in ways that have not been faced previously? One answer to that question may be particularly valuable for the policy dialogue in trying to do what Gilbert called expand the range of choice among the sustainable floodplain design alternatives available for all, including those low-income communities mentioned at the outset. Perhaps the dialogue can do so in part by drawing upon and building upon the rich contributions that have been made to date in various studies, research centers, and civil society organizations across Pakistan, including the ADB eco-revitalization plans that include some excellent design ideas. Well, these are some of the highlights of Ravi history and heritage that I've been thinking about and thought might be of interest to the policy dialogue. And I send best wishes for you in this important conversation that you have in the remainder of the day. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Westcott, and I'm sure this will spur considerable enlightened conversation based on both the historical context you presented and also some ideas from contemporary design. One quick question which I was asked to present to you is, you are familiar with the RUDA effort, the government effort to have a redevelopment of the Ravi, which also involves in some scenarios bringing water from other river systems closer to Lahore and allowing for more of a kind of an esplanade development. What are your words of caution or guidance around that kind of proposition?
I've read the RUDA documents that include the EIA and river training studies, and have noted that there's a lot of detailed analysis of flood flow management. Some of the things that I've mentioned have been with those RUDA proposals in mind. And I didn't make an explicit connection, but the ideas of unstable channels, channel migration, sedimentation processes that are perennial. The challenges of trying to maintain hard edges in a natural and alluvial river system. The issues of intensification and increased investment in areas that are likely to have both recurrent but also new hazards. These are sobering aspects of the proposal that I imagine will be addressed in the three panel groups in much more detail. I thought that it's helpful just to see that just how these involve multi-decadal and even centuries-long types of dynamics in this hydrometeorological system and urban system that require not conventional master planning approaches and design approaches that might be more applicable to stable coastal environments in the Gulf region, but rather are unique to monsoon South Asian cities, and that really will be a fundamental importance both for the Ruta area, but also more broadly for metropolitan Lahore, which, as we know, is facing these pluvial drainage problems on just increasing basis from year to year. So these are just some initial thoughts, and I really look forward to hearing what the panels can do, because I'm also realize that work is continuously ongoing that I'd love to learn more about. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we will be recording the panel sessions and sharing those with you. And we hope this will be the start of a longer term engagement with RUDA to make sure that the planning is done in a more sustainable way, both environmentally and socially. So thanks for your guidance, and we look forward.
There's just one more thought
Please,
that comes
please.
to mind that really comes from the, really looking at the Mausa surveys of the local land uses and the types of kind of adjustments, natural adaptation of floodplain agriculture. Which and of that 1944 plan that had hoped for a kind of integration of the agro-urban model, and I think there's something to be said for and to be considered afresh as to how the agricultural agrarian systems of Punjab connect with the cities, which is really part of the joint heritage of the region. That's just a kind of, I'll make that as just a final thought.
Yeah. That's a great point. And of course, right now, because the river is depleted most of the year, there is agriculture happening right on the riverbed, essentially. And that needs to be taken into account, of course, with these efforts. So well, we will definitely be in touch, Professor Wescoat, in terms of the next steps. We want this to be not just a scholarly effort, but actually one which can have a direct policy and planning impact on what is really our beloved city of Lahore, and beyond in the Ravi Basin. So thanks again, and